Hello to all who are watching this interview produced by Marshall Opera for their oral history project. My name is Kelly Guerra and I'm a mezzo-soprano. Today I have the great pleasure of interviewing the sensational American composer Laura Kaminsky. Laura Kaminsky is the composer of the 2014 breakout hit opera As One. I'm going to read a little bit of her bio and we'll get started. Laura Kaminsky frequently addresses social and political issues in her work with a distinct musical language that is full of fire as well as ice, contrasting dissonance and violence with tonal beauty and meditative reflection. As One, co-librettist Mark Campbell and Kimberly Reed, is the most produced contemporary opera since its 2014 premiere, with over 60 productions to date internationally. Other operas, Some Light Emerges, Today It Rains, Hometown to the World, Finding Right, and February. Upcoming is a chamber opera in Poems, The Post Office for Queen City Opera, and Time to Act for a consortium led by Pittsburgh Opera. Awarded the Polish Gold Cross of Merit by the President of Poland for exemplary public service and humanitarian work, Kaminsky has been recognized by the NEA, Kusevitsky Music Foundation, Opera America, Chamber Music America, and U.S. Artists International, among others. Kaminsky is on the faculty of Purchase College Conservatory of Music and is currently a mentor for the Seattle Opera's Creation Lab. Laura, thank you for your time today. Let's get started.
Great.
What are you working on right now?
At this very minute, I am finishing the last minute and a half of my latest opera, which is called Lucidity. It's a chamber opera for four singers that will premiere in New York with on-site opera in November and then go immediately following to Seattle Opera. Um, and I'm literally in the very end of the final scene. It should be done by tomorrow at the latest.
Yay, that's amazing.
That's what I say.
So who are or what are your current inspirations and maybe are do they have to do with this project that you're working on right now?
Well, this project is definitely something that comes from a deep and meaningful place for me. I was approached about 7 years ago by the librettist David Cody, who wanted to consider us doing a project together. And we didn't really know each other. We knew each other's work. And I really believe that the best collaborations are forged from deep trust and knowledge of a human being. So we started meeting and getting to talk, you know, who are you? What do you care about? Not just what pieces have you made and who are your contacts in the opera world, but really who are you as a human being and what do you care about? And it took a long time for us to find a story we wanted to tell. But we came up with this project called Lucidity, and it was born out of many truths in both of our lives, but the story is completely fictitious. And Lucidity deals with an elderly woman, a singer, who realizes she is in the early stages of dementia. And she signs herself up for a study on the impact of music on memory. Unbeknownst to her, the scientist, the neuroscientist who is running the study, had once been her student. And many things are unveiled over the course of this opera. This older singer has an adopted son who gives up his career as a pianist to care for his mother, who feels that he is doing this as an excuse for not confronting the stresses of building a professional career. So there's those levels of tension. The thing that motivated it was that there's an older singer named Lucy Shelton who just celebrated her 80th birthday a month ago. And she is an iconic, powerful, significant figure in 20th and 21st century vocal chamber music, and is also known, I believe, as the person who has done the most Pierrot lunaires in this country. And I've known Lucy for 40 something years. I was a student in graduate school, when I first saw her perform with the Da Capo chamber players, and I completely was blown away. And over the course of time and the smallness of the new music community in New York, we got to know each other. And when I became the artistic director at Town Hall in the late 80s, she became one of the first artists that performed in the hall under my leadership. And so there was a deep historical connection. And over the years, she and I are both Scrabble players. We would meet occasionally for Scrabble games. And I went over to her house one day, and this was when she was 73, I think, or 72. And she said, "So what's new? What's going on?" I said, "Well, I'm just working on this opera. I'm a little bit stuck here." She said, "Well, what are you stuck?" I said, "Well, I actually have the score with me." And she said, "Could I take a look?" And I opened up my score, and we never played Scrabble. She read through the entire score amazingly, pointing at things, this isn't so graceful for the voice here. This might be better if you. It was amazing watching her dissect the score. And then in the course of conversation, she sort of said, "So when are you going to write something for me?" And that was the genesis of the idea that brought David's and my story together with an actual lead singer. And as David and I evolved it, we kind of knew who we wanted to be in it. We wanted to work with people we respected and trusted and knew would be sensitive to his words and my music. So we proposed this whole project, and On-Site Opera came forward as the lead commissioner. Lucy turned 75, and I convinced her to do a 75th birthday concert, which she did at Merkin Hall in New York. And it was one of the most joyful, exuberant experiences that an audience has seen in many years. I mean, everybody was singing at the end. It was incredible. And that's her spirit. And so when this project became more real, it was like, you know what? We're going to do this for your 80th birthday. The point being is that she's still an active singer. And if you know Kaya Sarayaho's opera Innocence, which is now coming to the States, it's been in Europe, Kaya wrote a role for Lucy in that piece. And so it all sort of like, this feels organic and human and connected and real. And that's the way I like to work. So
Mm,
for David and me, the story we made up came from truths in our lives. Because when we met, my father was suffering from Alzheimer's, dementia, and sang in a chorus for people with dementia. And it was moments of brightness and light for him. And that resonated as a truth. David was nursing his wife to her death. She was dying from cancer. So we were dealing with grief and sacrifice and balancing your own creative life with your caregiving life, with your anger and your fear and your guilt and love and discovery. And one thing led to another. We built these characters. So the neuroscientist role is played by Blythe Gessert in the premiere. And Blythe is somebody, she was the first person, she workshopped as one before its world premiere.
oh,
So
wow.
she has been with me from the very first attempt I ever had to make opera, because I barely had written any songs before I wrote as one. So I was really a neophyte, not knowing what I was doing. And she's been this steady with me for over a decade now. And I've written other works for her, including the piece that was commissioned by Santa Fe Opera, Hometown to the World. And in fact, Lucy Shelton was in Santa Fe for the premiere of that. And Lucy and Blythe have a respectful and loving artistic friendship.
Mm,
So, like, all these things feel so resonant and real. But I was not a music major in
right.
college. I was a psychology major, and I ended up giving up the thought of going on in my interest in the brain to pursue a life in the arts. And our character that Blythe plays, Dr. Claire Klugman, was a promising mezzo soprano who studied with our Lucy character, whose name is Lily, as in Lily Boulanger, spelled the same way, who studied with her and realized, maybe I don't have what it takes to be a singer. I'm going to give this up and do what I love next, which is the sciences, but forge this connection with my love of music and become a researcher on the impact of music on the brain. So all of this was made up by David and me. He wrote the most beautiful, beautiful libretto on this story that we created. And it's poetic, and it's been an honor to set it to music. I was recently in Seattle for an event at the Allen Institute, which is a science research institute funded by the late Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, to map every single cell of the brain and understand how every cell of the brain functions in relationship to every other. It's a phenomenal institution with huge amounts of funding to support this mammoth research project. And when they found out that Seattle Opera was doing this piece, there was a partnership that was forged. So I went and gave a talk, and Blythe flew out and sang 2 excerpts from the opera to an audience of music lovers and neuroscientists about music and the brain. And at the beginning, when I was talking with the director, Rui Costa of the Allen Institute, I said, let me just read you, because at first they weren't sure they were going to do music at this talk. And I said, me talking is not that interesting, but this is an opera. You should have music. And that's when they thought, well, maybe we should just invite Blythe to come out and sing something. I'm just going to read the opening lines of David's beautiful libretto. This is
Great.
Dr. Klugman. And I should find page 1 of my libretto. That would be a good idea. Scene 1, here we go. And she's alone in her office at the Institute trying to dictate the opening lines of the book that she's writing about her research, and she's stuck. There is a place in the brain where music lives, where music plays. Time cannot touch it. Through music, we reach into that place, open the hidden door to bring out memory. Sound. Sound is with us from the beginning to the end. In the womb, 18 weeks alive, before our body has fully formed, we hear the beat of our mother's heart, keeping time with our own. As we pass, the last thing we sense, no matter how faint and weak we feel, we hear the voice of those by our side, speaking, crying, praying. Sound, miraculous sound, music, song, a heartbeat, is with us first to last. Sound surrounds our lives, and music lives in us.
Oh my goodness.
When David shared this with me, I was like, there's no way I can possibly set this to music. It's such beautiful poetry.
Oh my goodness. That's what I
Um,
love about your as I've been getting to know your music, and I've been learning carne barata from hometown to the world. I've been so touched with your connection to the soul and how you're able to express just so much pain and complication through your music, and I it's been an honor to learn the aria. I've been
it's
a
been
big
an honor to have you learn it.
it's so beautiful, and I want to kind of discuss more about your beginnings as a composer and how it relates or doesn't relate to your studies in college, and kind of
Sure.
your path that way, because I think that's what is so unique about your music. There's so much gravitas to it. I mean, so many composers have gravitas, but there's um there's this really deep connection to the mind and the soul, and everything feels so personal. And yeah, so I'd love to discuss how your kind of your
Oh,
path.
well, first of all, thank you for those really kind words. I think that really touched me because for me, it's never about the music. It's about the soul behind it all. The music is just the vehicle to express the feelings. So you asked about my early training, I grew up in New York City, went to public school, loved art and music and all of that as a kid. Um, I wanted to go to music and art high school, LaGuardia, and I was actually preparing an art portfolio, not a music audition.
Like
And
drawing.
to drawing, yep. Um, I thought that was going to be my path. I kind of, as a 12-year-old kid, was drawing and making things and thought maybe I'd be an architect when I grew up. Like which makes sense. I mean, a composer is really an architect of sound.
Yeah.
And at the very last minute, I thought, you know what? I kind of get happy when I'm doing music. And I was already playing the piano. I wasn't a great player. I hated practicing. I liked to improvise. And then I tried to write down the things that I was making up. And that was sort of my early foray into composing as like a 11-year-old kid was I asked my parents, could I have piano lessons? Because I have all these musical things in my head and I have to figure out how to write them down.
Uh-huh.
And so I sort of started out not knowing anything, writing little tunes and stuff. I tortured my poor little sisters because every Saturday I would make us put on a show for my parents that I would rehearse them. And we stole from all the great Broadway musical theater. That is what we grew up with for the most part. And so we would do little scenes from West Side Story or Fiddler on the Roof or Sound of Music with costumes. And I would play the piano and my sisters would one sister had a beautiful voice and the other one could dance and she was cute. And so they knew I was very bossy older sister. We would put on shows. And so I started out making things up and putting on shows, which kind of makes sense that I abandoned psychology and ended up as an artistic director of a theater. It's like we never know. I had no path. But then when I went to college, I was first generation American, and my mom is from London. She grew up during the war. She went to art school and had many obstacles, as does our character of Lily. My mom wanted to do architecture or sculpture, and they said, no, you're a woman, you're going to go to the best art school, but you have to do fashion design because that's what women do. So, Lily was this composer in our opera, but she couldn't really have a career back then as a composer and and she was a singer. So she made her career mostly as a singer, but she was a closet composer. And that's part of the secret of lucidity. I was a psychology major in college. I went to Oberlin. And I chose Oberlin because I didn't know nothing really about colleges in this country, but a friend of mine said, you should go to this school in Ohio because one of my rules in my own head was I wanted to be far enough away that I wasn't expected to come home every weekend. I really needed to my family's very close, and I would feel if I had the excuse that I couldn't come home, then I wouldn't have to come home and I could start to differentiate myself and really just go for it.
Wow.
And so my friend Gerard, who sang in the Met Children's Chorus, and he used to let me come back. So I got permission to come and sit. So that was my introduction to opera, was actually sitting in those rehearsals when he was a kid. He was the one who said, you should go to Oberlin. And so I looked it up. It's like, oh, good. It's 10 hours away by bus. I'll never have to come home every weekend. There's a conservatory of music, so I can study music. And it was the first school to admit Blacks and women and have co-ed dorms. I said, oh, and they've got this sort of liberal social philosophy. I'm going to go there. And that was the place I went. I did go to the college. I could have done a double degree in both music and liberal arts, but that would have been a 5-year program, which would have cost more money. So I said, I'm going to be practical. I'm going to just do as much music as I can, but I'm going to become a psychologist and have a secure life. And then I messed that up. Um, I was given the permission by the dean to have a junior recital and a senior recital. And as I was finishing my first string quartet, I was also finishing the research for my psychology honors thesis. And I was having such a good time doing my string quartet. And I was so like tediously studious doing my honors thesis. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to go to graduate school of psychology. And I ripped up all my graduate school applications. So it was
Wow.
all by everything was by mistake. I did not have a plan. I just knew that I needed to continue writing.
Hmm.
It never occurred to me I could go to graduate school in music because I didn't have an undergraduate degree. I mean, I've never done, theory and solfege and any like so I just sent some scores in the mail in the old-fashioned days where it cost a lot to photocopy each page and you made a package and you mailed it off. And I sent a package to George Crumb in Philadelphia and a package to Mario Davidovsky in New York. And one day I got a call in the dorm where they ring in the dorm hallway and somebody goes, Laura, there's a phone call for you. And it
Wow.
was Mario Davidovsky. And he said, I have your package. You said you'd like to take lessons. And I said, yes. How much would it cost to take a weekly lesson from you? I'm going to come back to New York when I finish college. He said, oh, no, no, no. You can go to graduate school and study with me. It's like, well, I can't go to graduate school. I'm not a music major. I haven't taken any of these prerequisites. He said, no, 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 it's fine. And he offered me two options. One was Columbia and the other was City College. And at City College, I had a full fellowship and a teaching assistantship. It's like, I'm going to get paid to go to graduate school in music, which I never thought I could do. It's like, okay, great. And so that's kind of how it all happened. I always say to my students, stay true to what you really want to do, and you'll figure out the path. It may not be obvious, but write from a place of honesty, only write things that have meaning, and somehow the next thing will reveal itself. Now, that may not be true as much today, where we've systematized expectations around you must have a doctorate to, do anything. I mean, I don't have a doctorate and I was the dean of a music conservatory. So, like, I think those days are past and I'm older now, but I still think that every young artist kind of just has to stay true to why they're doing what they're doing. And they'll find the way to do it with integrity, even if it's not the obvious path.
That's really, really good advice, honestly.
I don't know whether that makes their parents, feel secure. When I was the dean at SUNY Purchase of the music school, and prospective students would come with their parents for visiting day, and you'd make the pitch and try to explain why it was good. And some parent would say, I'm just really worried about Johnny who wanting to be a professional musician, and like, I mean, how are they going to live? And I said, gee, if they were a professional history major, do you worry that they're not going to become a world famous historian when they graduate? Like, let this kid who's 17 years old, who thinks they want to dedicate themselves to music, just go to school and be a music major, because they've already got so much ahead of advantages. They know how to collaborate. They know how to be responsible. They have to know how to, manage their time. They have goals. I mean, whether or not they become a famous cellist or whatever is irrelevant. This kind of focused education is so powerful. Don't worry about it. And we never say, oh, somebody's a failure if they were an honors history major and then they go work as an insurance salesman. Nobody says they're a failure.
Yeah.
So just, I always say, try to stay true to who you are. I mean, that's the story of As One, which is really the story of self-discovery and having the courage of your convictions to be who you are. And it's told through the voice of Hannah, who's transgender,
Yes.
but but it's a universal issue that's being addressed through that particular lens.
Hmm.
But it's how does one live an honest life, and what are you willing to give up in order to gain that true fulfilled journey? That's what it's all about.
Wow. You had so much success with As One, and I am curious. You had kind of briefly said that maybe you had not done much opera before As One, and now you do. It seems a lot of opera. So how, since this is the Marshall Opera Project, I'd love to just
Sure.
discuss what, yeah, your path into opera and writing for voice.
Totally. an accident. I mean, I really was an instrumental chamber music composer. That was the world I inhabited. And I did so because I loved the repertoire, and I had run a composer performer new music collective that I founded right after I finished graduate school so
Wow.
that my colleagues and I could still hear our music because, we were up at City College up in Harlem. We weren't part of Juilliard or Manhattan or Manus. We were sort of on the periphery or Columbia. So it's like, let's just do our own thing, sort of like my poor little sisters. Let's put on a show. And so what we did was we created a chamber ensemble of a group of great New York musicians who all believed in contemporary music, and we produced concerts that would put our pieces on with other repertoire. So I really know the chamber music canon and love it. I love the intimacy of writing chamber music. The idea of writing orchestral music was so not exciting to me when I was a young composer because the way that I think about music is that you're storytelling and it's all about emotion. And if you're in an orchestral setting, you don't get to talk to the players. You barely get to talk to the conductor.
Yeah.
So the idea of making music close up with your players was what motivated me to stay in that instrumental chamber music world.
Hmm.
I wrote a few songs, a few vocal chamber pieces, but not very much. And I was not an opera fan. And in a certain weird way, I'm still not really an opera person, but I'm a storyteller and I love the human voice and I love the vulnerability of what happens when you put singers who really are embodying characters to share human truths. And so when I did as one, it was a complete like out of left field thing for me. Um, I was the dean at Purchase at that time, and we were producing with the opera program there, Lee Hoybe's opera, The Tempest.
Hmm.
And we had Lee and his partner and the librettist, Mark Schulgasser, in residence for that semester, working with our students. And it was the last thing Lee did before he passed away.
Wow.
And the reason that we did it was Jack Trussell, who was then and is still the head of the opera program there, had premiered the piece and believed this piece needed to be better known. And he was waiting for the year when he had the right configuration of singers in the Purchase Opera program
Mm.
that he could mount a production. And I raised the money to do it and bring Lee and Mark in, and we raised the funds to do a recording. So that work is now recorded. And it was my first immersion into the making of opera since having sat backstage when Gerard sang in the children's chorus at the Met when I was a kid. And I loved the process. I loved what happened in the rehearsal room. I loved watching a singer get past, these are the notes and rhythms, and I'm sounding good today, to this is who I am as a character, and I'm telling this story that touches people.
Yeah.
And those moments in the collaboration, you're nodding, and I think it's because you as an artist, that's what you live for.
Oh, yeah.
Like, right? I mean, we by the time you are who you are, we know that you can sing anything that's put in front of you. That's not the point. The point is, yeah, now I can sing it, and now I'm going to go to the human truths of this story and this role. And so for me, when we were rehearsing The Tempest, I just sort of like, one day I'm going to be able to do this. Like it just hit me. And then I read this article about, I was following the gay marriage issue as it went from state to state around the country, thinking one day this is going to become federal. They will go to the Supreme Court. And that's because my wife and I got married in Canada. And we were like, come on, guys. Like, actually, nobody should have special privileges for being married. But if some couples can, then all couples should. Like, that's a whole other conversation. But there was an article in the New York Times that was talking about the upcoming vote in New Jersey for gay marriage. And I thought, oh, they're probably going to vote for it. And I wasn't even going to read the article, but something caught my eye. And they interviewed a couple, a married couple, and the husband was in the process of transitioning. And the point of the article was that if this law didn't pass in New Jersey after they completed the transition, and was then a woman, they would no longer be a heterosexual couple. So it spun in my imagination, well, what are you willing to give up? Do you give up your health insurance policy? Does the wife who's married to this man for 20 years and they've raised a family together, she all of a sudden has to think of herself as a lesbian because she's now married to this person that she loved who's a woman. And I thought, what is the core of a human being? Is it your body? Is it your gender? How do you think about yourself? What are
Mm,
you willing to give up? And I just looked at my wife, Rebecca, and I said, this is an opera because it asks these existential questions. What does society impose on you? When do you push back? How do you live truthfully? What impact does that have? What's the world in which you inhabit? And it stuck with me for 2 years. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But Rebecca kind of got that I was really serious about this. This is when you have a great spouse. Like they know that you're crazy, but they just go along for the ride and they help and they help you out. And so she would say, here's a book I think you should read. Here's a movie we should watch, like trying to help me, like, what's the story
mm,
that I want to tell? And one night she said, I found a film we should see. It's called Prodigal Sons, and it was by Kimberly Reed. And it was about her own transition and going back to her 20th high school reunion once she transitioned from Paul, the high school football star and valedictorian, to Kim, the filmmaker, and went back with her partner, Claire, to reunite with her family. And she filmed this whole, it's incredible. And when it was over, I said, I have to find this person. I need to make an opera with this person, with Kimberly Reed. And I wrote to the film company, and Kim and I met, and that was the beginning of the piece because it came from truth.
mm.
I'm eternally grateful to my wife, obviously, to Kim, and then Kim and I immediately knew how we wanted to structure the piece. She's a writer and a filmmaker, screenwriter, director, filmmaker, but not a librettist. So then Mark Campbell, I met him and I said, I have this weird project. And he was like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. I'd like to be involved. So I made a dinner for Kim and Mark. Much rosé was consumed. We
Amazing.
had a lot of conversation. And at the end, we knew that we were a team. So,
Wow. You have collaborated with Kim a few times, yes?
and with Mark and Kim and I did that as one. Then we were commissioned by Houston Grand Opera and wrote Some Light Emerges, inspired by the Mark Rothko Chapel in Houston as a
Beautiful.
spiritual space and people who go there for different, and so these different stories of why people seek sanctuary weave together in this little chamber opera. Then we had a commission from Opera Parallel in San Francisco and wrote Today It Rains, which was inspired by the part of Georgia O'Keeffe's story, the time when she left her life in New York and her marriage with Alfred Stieglitz and got on the train with Rebecca Strand to go to Santa Fe. That was transformative. So that we did that piece together. And then Kim and I did Hometown to the World, which was a Santa Fe opera for all voices commission, um, which is based on a true story about an immigration immigration customs enforcement raid on a small town in Iowa that was to this day still the largest raid in terms of the number of people. 25% of that town was deported and the town collapsed. So we told the story from the vantage point of the three different communities in the town and all of their struggles. And that was written for Blythe to play the role of the local Iowan. And then you are singing the role of Linda Morales, who was the wife of the immigrant who was deported with their son.
Yeah.
And then Michael Kelly, who coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, is Lucy Shelton's coach and works with her to keep her 80-year-old voice supple. He played the role of Abraham Fleischman.
Oh, wow.
So we're all one. And now you're in the family too.
Oh, that's so
See?
nice. Thank you. I guess I'd love to wrap this up, we spoke a little bit before the interview to organize, of course, and you mentioned the Nina Simone quote, "An artist's duty is to reflect the times." And I find that in your work you definitely take that to heart as you broach so many current topics that are important to you. So I'd love to maybe talk about how coming from a place of honesty and love and doing this career for the right reasons to I don't know, share your message to other performers and composers and yeah.
Thank you for that. It's a great closing question. Um, I talk about this a lot with my students because there's so much, why should we learn this music by these dead composers? And I just look at my students and go, you know what? They weren't dead when they wrote this music. They were like you. They woke up in the morning, they took a shower, brushed their teeth, they had their coffee, and they thought about the world in which they lived, and they wrote music in response to the world in which they lived. And yes, those were historic struggles, but they were their struggles and you have your struggles. So if they were dealing with the Holocaust or they were dealing with slavery or they were whatever their issue was, suffrage, you're dealing with climate change, you're dealing with voter suppression. We we take in, if we're real citizens, if we're not just narcissistic, selfish people, if we live in the world and we're all realizing that we're all dependent on each other,
Mm,
we're affected by the world in which we live. So I don't choose to write these pieces because it's like, oh, what would be the next hot topic that's going to be important, that's going to get attention? It's never, I mean, as one, I had never really thought about transgender issues at all when I decided to make this piece, but it was like, this is a fundamental human truth through this lens. And I think it's moving me. I think it has the potential to touch people.
mm,
So I look for stories that I think are specific but universal. And even when I'm writing abstract instrumental music, more often than not, it comes from some response to the world in which I live. And it could be as fleeting as I looking out the window. I live up in the Bronx and I look out on the Hudson River and the way the light glints can spark a musical idea. So that piece is about the Hudson River, even though there's no words and there's no specificity. That's what sparked it for me. So
mhm,
when you wake up in the morning and you hear that, the glacial ice is melting and you really think about it, that affects how you get up and do your day. And it makes you cognizant of people who are dying from drought and wildfires, and there shouldn't be famine because there's enough resource, but there is because there's greed. And then you think about it, and it's like, oh, that's going to be infused into my work.
mm,
So it just comes from a place of maybe the powerlessness of being an artist,
mm,
but that our power is that we may not be able to make the political or social or economic structural change, but we can make the heart change.
mhm,
We can make Art has the potential to make people feel what they know, and when you feel it, it may spark change. So that kind of is what motivates how I get up every day and struggle with these things called notes and rhythms, and
oh my
those
goodness.
are just the building blocks.
I could talk with you for hours, but I've already taken so much time. I really, what a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for having this interview through the Marshall Opera Project and meeting with me and the generosity of your time. And of course, thank you for your music. I can't wait to
And
sing your aria.
well, thank you for your generosity, and I've enjoyed this conversation, and I cannot wait to hear you sing Carne Barata.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Be
right.
well. Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Bye bye.